Of the Building and Lands Committee, thank you. Sit down. Building and Lands Committee is here, along with in the gallery, the administration, Mayor Corcoran, and Director of Planning. Did I get that right as far as the title? And Kim Lieber, and lawyer is here, Brian, and as well as council members Martin DeVries, Georgia Awig, Jason Jacobs, and Eric Schaefer. On the minutes, has everybody had an opportunity to review? Any changes, additions, comments? Seeing none, minutes are approved as stand. New business. First, we're going to switch the agenda just a wee bit and go and discuss ordinance 2025-115, an ordinance amending chapter 628, fair housing of the North Ridgeville General Offenses Code. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to turn it over to the administration. Is that something that you would rather comment first, Kim?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to comment on this legislation. The purpose of this update was a question that got raised in regards to the city's Fair Housing Board that came up through the council's office. And so as we looked at the ordinance, our Fair Housing Ordinance, we noted that, it had been established originally in 1989 and really not much had changed since, but things have changed in the realm of fair housing. So it caused us to take a bit of a deeper dive, like many of the rabbit holes we find ourselves going down to with older pieces of legislation. So, it became a goal not just to figure out what to do with the Fair Housing Board, but also to make sure that our ordinance was current and up to date and that it fully aligns with the current federal and Ohio state law. So having a local fair housing ordinance does show our commitment to protecting our residents' rights, and it also can be important in ensuring that we qualify for federal funds through the Community Development Block Grant or other HUD-funded programs. So some things that have changed. Federal law prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability. And then Ohio law additionally adds ancestry and military status. So our ordinance is a little out of step. It doesn't have all of those and has some things that aren't those items. So the updated ordinance before you reflects all of those federal and state recognized classes and nothing above or beyond that. We are proposing to eliminate the Fair Housing Board. So previously this board was staffed through the Treasurer's Office. I feel like looking back at some of the minutes that there wasn't really a clear understanding of the board's roles and responsibilities. It really wasn't about home rehab or physical improvements to housing. It was about access to purchase or rent housing and to ensure landlords met their federal obligations to not discriminate against tenants or also in the sale and purchase of housing. The board's role in our ordinance now talks about investigating and enforcing fair housing laws, but I really don't feel like the board or really city officials have this niche knowledge or skill in this area. There are many nonprofits and other entities that do this kind of nonprofit work. So the ordinance kind of strips out the Fair Housing Board, but in its place would encourage partnerships with nonprofit organizations or other government agencies for enforcement and education. So it maintains the city's commitment to fair housing while handing over this enforcement aspect to others. The city has approached Lorain County to partner in this area. They do have fair housing under their community development department. And so far, we've received very positive feedback from their department about entering into some kind of memorandum of understanding or agreement where they could provide those types of services on a referral basis from North Ridgeville. They say they already take calls from all over the county, including North Ridgeville. So this is not really a big leap for them to take on this work. So again, I think the community benefits of this ordinance are, again, to ensure that our ordinance aligns with federal and state law, that we provide equitable access to housing for all residents, that we're reducing our legal exposure by making sure that we align with those state and federal laws. and that we leave ourselves open to the opportunity of a partnership agreement with Lorraine County. So that's my summary of the intent of this particular ordinance.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Law Director, any comments?
Only that I have reviewed the proposed legislation, and it does comply with current state and federal law.
Thank you. Members of council, any comments, questions?
I have just a quick comment. So the Fair Housing Board will be no longer in play at all, right? And I don't think it really met anyways.
I don't know that we had a current or active roster of members.
Yeah, I don't.
And I don't know that the board has met in maybe years.
And I'd looked at this a while back, and I had a thought or question I guess would be a great time to ask. So this has to deal with discrimination is the primary objective here. Could there be a role, or is there other role in other fair housing ordinances in other places that would be with to deal with conditions of so you got a landlord that the house is unsafe or whatever. I know that would probably fall to the building department, but maybe if someone contacted well, at this point, there is no fair housing board, so it would be directed by the administration to do that, right? That would be the next step. If there's an issue that's not discrimination, but conditions, et cetera.
Yes, we certainly take property maintenance complaints. If there's any, apartment dwelling or, complex where there's any residential issues, we can investigate those. One of my longer-term goals for building department is to set up a rental registration program where even landlords of single-family rentals would register them with the city so that we would have the ability to understand what all properties are being rented and then be able to also perform exterior property maintenance on those just to make sure that they're keeping the integrity of our neighborhoods solid and well-maintained.
Thank you. That's all the comments I have. Thanks.
Councilwoman Swank? Okay. The only question I would have is, would the fair housing ordinance affect HOAs that have rules against rental of properties within their HOA?
No. This simply defines the obligations of landlords when they rent, but it doesn't require rental or prohibit rental in any way.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Well, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to send 2025-115 back to council for consideration.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes to be put at the next council meeting of September 2nd. All right. The next item on for new business, an ordinance amending sections 1268.02, 1270.02, and 1272.04 of the North Ridgeville zoning code to update use regulations for automobile service stations and gasoline stations. I guess since I'm the one who introduced this, I'll explain my reasoning behind this. Traveling around North Ridgeville, I noticed that we have a plethora of gas stations. And also noticed there's quite a few corners and lots that would loan themselves to more gas stations. Also, what I noticed is a few gas stations that have closed, and we're still stuck with them because of having to reclaim the soil, pull tanks, things of that nature. And so it comes down to the point, once a location becomes a gas station, it's difficult to have other uses if that gas station fails, closes for whatever reason. And yes, I'm aware that the state does require tanks to be pulled once a gas station is closed, but I also know that many times when a gas station closes, bankruptcy is declared. They have no money to pull those tanks. So the city gets stuck with a location that is a closed gas station. Prime example is the BP station at the corner of Center Ridge and 83. Also, the Marathon station that was over near Cook and Lorraine, although it has been reclaimed, it stood empty for a number of years because the tanks were pulled improperly, not They weren't certified as being pulled properly, so stuck with that property for a while until recently. And I guess the thing is how many gas stations do we really need? That's why I thought, same with the car washes, how many car washes do we need? And so we did pass legislation. Now, part of that ordinance too, limiting the gas stations, would be negated, we'll put it that way, if a gas station is part of an overall project, an auxiliary services rather than the main service. Prime example of something like that would be Giant Eagle with their gas station in front, even though Giant Eagle doesn't own gas stations anymore. They sold out. And Myers operations such as that. I thought this was a legislation that, as far as I'm concerned, was a win-win for the city. Also, it's a matter of, right now, the city is dealing with lack of foresight from our forefathers from the 60s, maybe the 70s, when they zoned heavily for residential. No foresight to understand what that meant. 90%, I think, of the city was zoned R1, and look what's happening. A lot of folks are upset because of all the development. Well, I think foresight is start limiting gas stations. So down the road, 20, 30 years from now, we don't have a whole row of gas stations that are empty, unused, and the property can't be used for anything else until the tanks are pulled and the soil is reclaimed. And that was my reasoning. I will open it up to administration for their thoughts and go from there.
I understand why you're doing it. I think Kim can touch on this a little bit in depth, but we're going through a rewrite of all of our codes, our zoning codes. So I think if we start introducing legislation to stop whatever business you might want to in one way, shape, or form, we're going to be butting up against that effort and kind of rendering it useless. So I just caution this path because it conflicts with what we're already doing. And I'll let Kim talk about that.
Any legislation like this, there's some pros and cons we'll have to consider. So certainly, this ordinance would result in fewer gas stations, service stations. So, that would reduce oversaturation. It would align with probably community desire to limit the kinds of auto-oriented uses that create a lot of traffic and congestion. By making these uses conditional uses, it does give the city and staff and planning commission more control and ability to set conditions. So that's good. Design, buffering, traffic flow, lighting, all those things can be discussion as part of the conditional use process that is more challenging when it's just a permitted use by right. The character of our corridors, nobody would probably rank a gas station as high on the list of aesthetic improvements to our commercial areas. So, it would prevent gas stations from really dominating our key commercial areas. Limiting gas stations could also kind of over time help push out some underperforming gas stations. So that could be a positive. And then it is consistent with our car wash policy. So the 1 mile is similar to what we've done recently with car washes. So, but we also have to think of some of the other potential negatives that we just have to deal with. And it's just wise to do that as you make any code change. So, this would push a lot of existing gas stations into a non-conforming status. So, anywhere where there are multiple gas stations within a mile of each other, those gas stations become non-conforming because they're not spaced properly. So, if any were to become vacant and that vacancy were to occur for at least a year, then they could not reopen as a gas station. So if the tanks weren't pulled. I'm not sure exactly what the rules are for how quickly the tanks have to come out, or so I'm not super familiar with that area. But again, if vacant for over a year, then it could not reopen, but yet the infrastructure's there. So there's the potential risk of blight, and we've seen this too, where closed stations can sit vacant due to the high cleanup and redevelopment cost. If there are non-conforming gas stations existing and they change ownership, or if they've sat vacant for a period of time and want to reopen, that separation requirement, that would be appealable. So those issues can go to BZA. So then, BZA would probably be put in a little bit of a tough situation of like, do you allow or not allow? Like the intent is to reduce gas stations, but if it was a gas station, it's set up for a gas station, does council want to maybe consider whether or not the BZA can approve that condition or not approve that condition in the ordinance? And then just the impact on redevelopment. So, we deal with this maybe more on the residential side, where we get requests for zoning letters from like mortgage companies or lenders that always want us to say, hey, if this structure were to be damaged by more than 50%, or if there's an act of God or a storm or a fire and it were destroyed, could this thing be rebuilt under your code? And we get that a lot, at least on the residential side. But to know that on the commercial side that no, like then any gas station that would have been damaged to that extent could not be reopened potentially. So sometimes that prevents lenders from wanting to lend money if they think that their lending isn't secure by the property if it couldn't be rebuilt. We also have in our non-conforming ordinance some limitations of, how you could expand or continue non-conforming uses or add on to non-conforming buildings. So we'd probably have to see how that interacts with the code as well. So I think that there's a lot to talk about. There's, positives, negatives. The mayor mentioned we are in the middle of our big zoning code update. So I think it's important to have the discussion of how that aligns with our draft thinking at this point. I think that's a really appropriate conversation to have with Planning Commission. They've not yet had the opportunity to have this discussion, and I know their decision should be, or their input and their maybe recommendations for edits or changes or additional information should be something that council considers. I think it might be a good exercise to quantify the impact, to look at how many gas stations this would affect that are already less than that 1 mile, just so we kind of have an idea on a map of which properties might be impacted. And then also just finally, I would like to clarify the districts that would be included. I see in the ordinance that B3, it would go from permitted to conditional, B4 also conditional, and then eliminated from the B5 district. But I believe currently in the B2 district, they're already conditional, but they don't have that spacing addition added in this ordinance. There is in B2 this strange 50-foot setback from the nearest residential district language. It's like no other district. It's a little on its own. So I'm not sure if the intent was because it was already conditional to leave it, or if it just got missed, but I would like to have the conversation of what happens to those in the B2 district too. So I guess those are my comments as of now. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Law Director, any comments?
None at this time.
Okay. Members of council, audience?
I have a comment,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. So trying to go with the theme of matching up with what we're trying to do for our commercial development, one of the things we're doing is redoing zoning. We're analyzing that. So maybe, and this is an idea for more ideas to discuss, I guess, but what if you did a moratorium on this as opposed to changing legislation that would then see if it's still needed once the new zoning legislation came out? So this is something to mention for, at least worth a discussion.
As long as you're aware, I believe moratoriums, you can only have, 6 months maximum, typically?
That's probably a question for the law director. I know we typically have done them at 6-month increments, and then we have renewed them when we have not yet been able to complete the zoning review process.
Through the chair, it would be 6 months.
Okay.
You can try a year, but we've seen cases where they've had trouble if they're a year or more than that.
Okay.
Through the chair.
Yes.
You talked about the non-conforming with the gas stations, but we passed legislation on the car washes, and on that corner of Lorraine Road and Larinago, there's 4 car washes. Do those non-conformings also apply to those car washes? Yes. Okay. And then I believe the BP on Center Ridge in 83, the road widening is what, in effect, got rid of those gas station pumps. And I think that it just failed because they had no gas to serve. So that was kind of like a one-off situation where they widened the road and took their gas pumps.
Understand, but
The business just ceased to exist. They shut the business down themselves. The soil there is still contaminated, which we're trying to work through that process. And the city would like to purchase that property at some point. But that's where we are with the BP property.
yeah, and that's one of my reasons for this legislation is to cut down on those incidences, because gas stations typically have a lifespan of somewhere around 30 years before they either have to be rebuilt or they close altogether. And quite frankly, with the economy going the way it is right now and changes in mode of transportation, it could be even sooner. Who knows at this point? And so we'll be stuck with a string of dead gas stations. And if we continue to allow them to spring up on every corner because zoning says they're allowed to. And that's a matter of, I guess, foresight on our part, is to try to limit that issue. As far as trying to limit other types of businesses, as far as I'm concerned, they should stand on their own merit. The main reason behind the gas stations is the fact that it's difficult to have that land used for another purpose because of the tanks, the reclaiming of the soil, and that type of thing, because it's expensive. As the city found out when we closed down Bushers, a surprise tank was there, and it cost us a fortune to remediate that tank. And I know they have new technologies, and quote, they're not supposed to leak, but they will. I know that. That's the main reason for this legislation, is to cut down on the possibilities of blighted, as you put it, sites down the road. And because right now the easiest development, quite frankly, is gas stations. For a lot of the empty lots that are along Center Ridge and Lorraine and 83, as a matter of fact. So that's my reasoning.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add, I do agree with what Ms. Lieber said. Planning should probably like to hear what they have to say about it as well. So if we had a direction after this meeting to do something, maybe send it to them.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we send it back to council, but only after Planning Commission has had a chance to review the legislation. And that way we cover our bases and let planning take a look at it and give a little bit more time for this legislation to be reviewed and looked at.
Through the chair, if I can ask the administration, would we have to send it back to council and then council recommend it to go to the planning commission?
No, it's already in planning, but depending on what they have to say, they might suggest a lot of changes to it, which then you'd have to introduce an amendment to the ordinance. And they could recommend that you don't do anything, and then you'd have an ordinance on the council agenda that they disagree with, and you'd have to vote on that. And I mean, I guess you guys could go in one direction and they can go in another, but it opens up that door which would be a little confusing. Just pointing
Mr. Chair,
those things out.
Mr. Chair, if I could, our amendments ordinance, so the ordinance that runs through the process for amendment says that it goes to planning commission, and then it goes to a public hearing in front of council before you would vote on it. So both of those are opportunities to allow the planning commission and the public to interact and to share their thoughts and recommendations. So I think it's appropriate to go to planning commission, flush out, maybe they have some recommendations for changes or edits, and then to have your public hearing and to solicit any other information from the public before this committee would make any recommendation, either pro or con. If you're just sending it back to council, that's one thing, but if you're actually make a recommendation up or down, I think that appropriately waits till after you've heard all of the input.
Through the chair.
Yes.
If I can ask Ms. Lieber one question. When is the zoning, I know you guys are working on it, but like, are you looking at 6 months out, 12 months out?
My goal was to have the drafting done by the end of this year and then to begin the, I guess, adoption process through planning commission and council probably the first quarter of next year. We already have drafted preliminarily like the different districts and uses, use standards, and we're working on dimensional standards now. So a lot of this stuff related to uses has already at least has a shape to it. So, I'm happy to share that first draft thinking with planning commission in our conversation and see how it aligns with this direction. I mean, certainly we've discussed using conditional use for more types of uses that have a disparate impact on surrounding properties, and things that are auto-oriented tend to be ripe for that kind of treatment, conditional use. So I don't see that being a conflict. Spacing, that's where I just want to understand fully before we dive in what impact that might have on existing businesses, not just thinking about the future, but thinking about the businesses we have now. So I just want to maybe gather a little bit more data so we can quantify that impact before any action would be taken.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, to the administration, we can recommend sending this back to council for consideration. That would be after planning and a public hearing, as you mentioned. And if for some reason we wanted to send it back to committee at that point, we could always do that for further discussion after planning and a public hearing had on it. So instead of a recommendation, yay or nay, we can just send it back to further consideration now, and that moves it along. So with that being said, I would move to send it back to council for further consideration.
I'll second. Do you have to withdraw yours?
Oh, did you make a motion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I apologize, I didn't realize you made.
Well, quite frankly, the motion I made is somewhat
Similar.
moot because I believe Planning Commission will be meeting before, or no, they won't.
September 9th.
September 9th, and our next council meeting is September 2nd. Okay, I'll withdraw mine. We'll send it back. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That completes our agenda. And